The November fog that morning hung over Baker Street like a shroud, muffling the clip-clop of horses' hooves and transforming the familiar gas lamps into ghostly beacons in the grey murk. I had settled myself by the fire with the morning edition of the Times, while Holmes, in his characteristic manner, stood at the window with his violin, drawing forth those melancholy notes that invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. The sharp rap upon our door cut through both the fog's silence and Holmes's musical meditation. Mrs. Hudson's hurried footsteps on the stairs announced a visitor of some urgency, and within moments, Inspector Lestrade appeared in our doorway, his usually composed demeanor replaced by an expression of genuine bewilderment. "Holmes," he began without preamble. Removing his damp coat and settling into the chair, I offered, "We have encountered something that defies all conventional logic. A case so perplexing that even our most experienced detectives are at their wits' end." Holmes lowered his violin, his grey eyes immediately sharpening with interest. "Ah, Lestrade, your agitation suggests something far more intriguing than the usual domestic disputes or commercial frauds. Pray, enlighten us. It concerns the murder of Mr. Edmund Hartwell, a prosperous silk merchant of Belgravia," Lestrade continued, his voice carrying the strain of a man who had wrestled with an impossible puzzle. "Found dead in his study yesterday evening, stabbed through the heart with a letter opener. But here's the devil of it. Holmes, his bride of barely 6 hours, appears to have provided her own alibi for the time of the murder." I set aside my newspaper, immediately intrigued. "Her own alibi, Inspector? However do you mean?" Lestrade reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly crumpled from handling. "This letter arrived at Scotland Yard yesterday afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, delivered by a district messenger boy. It was addressed to me personally and bore the seal of the Hartwell family." Holmes accepted the letter with the delicate precision he reserved for crucial evidence. As he read, his eyebrows rose incrementally, and I detected that familiar gleam of intellectual excitement that invariably preceded his most remarkable cases. "Most extraordinary," Holmes murmured, then read aloud. "Inspector Lestrade, I write to inform you that I shall be attending evening service at St. Bartholomew's Church in Smithfield from 7 until 8:30 this evening. I fear my husband may be in some danger from a business associate, and I wish to establish my whereabouts should any unfortunate incident occur. I remain, respectfully, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell." "The letter is dated yesterday morning," Lestrade explained, "and according to the messenger's log, it was dispatched from the Hartwell residence at 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, here's where the matter becomes impossible to fathom. Mr. Hartwell was discovered dead in his locked study at 8 o'clock, and our preliminary investigation suggests he was killed between 7:15 and 7:30. Precisely the time, I observed, when Mrs. Hartwell claimed she would be at church." "Exactly, Watson. And here's the most confounding aspect: we have verified her alibi completely. The vicar, 2 church wardens, and no fewer than 12 parishioners all confirm that Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell was indeed present at the evening service, arriving punctually at 7 and remaining until the conclusion at 8:30. She even contributed to the collection and spoke briefly with the vicar about arranging flowers for the following Sunday." Holmes had begun his characteristic pacing, his long fingers steepled before his chin. "Yet you suspect the lady nonetheless?" "I suspect nothing and everything," Lestrade replied with evident frustration. "The servants confirm that Mrs. Hartwell was the only person with access to her husband's study after 6 o'clock. The room was locked from the inside, with no other means of entry. The murder weapon, a silver letter opener, belonged to Hartwell's own desk set, yet the woman anticipated the need for an alibi and provided one that places her in full view of a dozen witnesses at the precise time of the crime." "A most thoughtful murderess," Holmes observed dryly, "if murderess she be. Tell me, Inspector, what of the couple's relationship? Was this a marriage of affection or convenience? By all accounts, they were devoted to one another, married only yesterday morning at St. George's, Hanover Square, with a reception at the Langham Hotel. The bride appeared radiant, the groom attentive, and their families spoke of nothing but happiness and mutual regard. Holmes paused in his pacing, his keen gaze fixed upon some point beyond our sitting-room walls. And yet, within hours of their wedding breakfast, one lies dead, and the other stands protected by an alibi of her own devising. What manner of business associate did Mrs. Hartwell fear might threaten her husband? That, Holmes, is another puzzle entirely. Hartwell's business partner, Mr. James Wickham, was dining at his club with 6 witnesses. His clerks had all departed by 5 o'clock. The only visitor to the house after the wedding party returned was a telegraph boy at 6:30, delivering what the butler described as urgent correspondence from overseas. The contents of this telegram, destroyed, according to Mrs. Hartwell. She claims her husband read it, became greatly agitated, and immediately threw it into the fire, saying only that the past had found him at last. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular intensity I had learned to associate with his most challenging cases. A bride who anticipates murder, provides her own alibi, and whose husband speaks of a threatening past, all on their wedding day. Inspector, you have brought us a puzzle worthy of our attention. Rising swiftly, Holmes reached for his coat and hat. Watson, your notebook and medical bag, if you please. Inspector, I trust the scene remains undisturbed. Excellent. We shall examine Mr. Hartwell's study and speak with his widow. If Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell indeed sent her own alibi, we must determine whether she did so as a murderess seeking to escape justice or as a woman who feared precisely what came to pass. As we prepared to venture into the fog-shrouded streets of London, I could not help but reflect upon the extraordinary nature of the case before us. A bride who sent her own alibi, whether from guilt or prescience, promised to challenge even Holmes's remarkable powers of deduction. The game, as my friend would say, was most decidedly afoot. The fog began to thin as our hansom clattered through the elegant streets of Belgravia, though it still clung tenaciously to the Georgian facades, like a shroud reluctant to lift. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile etched against the grey window, while Lestrade shifted restlessly beside me, clearly wrestling with the impossibilities of the case before us. Inspector, Holmes said suddenly, his keen gaze fixing upon our companion, I observe that this morning's urgency prevented you from completing your usual thorough review of overnight reports. The ink stain on your right cuff suggests you were interrupted while writing, and the faint aroma of cooling tea about your person indicates a hasty departure from Scotland Yard's canteen. Am I correct in assuming that news of Hartwell's death reached you before you could properly assess the night's other incidents? Lestrade blinked in astonishment. Confound it, Holmes. I had barely begun reviewing the robbery reports when the message arrived about the murder. Left my tea growing cold and my pen still wet on the blotter. He shook his head with familiar mixture of admiration and exasperation. How you divine such details from mere observation continues to astound me. The art lies not in observation alone, but in understanding what the observed details reveal about the larger pattern, Holmes replied, his attention already shifting to the approaching destination. And in this case, Inspector, I suspect we shall find that every detail, however minute, contributes to a most elaborate design. The Hartwell residence stood as a testament to commercial prosperity, a 4-story edifice of cream-colored stone with gleaming black railings and brass fittings that caught what little light penetrated the fog. Even in the muted afternoon gloom, the house projected an aura of respectability that made the violent crime within seem all the more incongruous. Note, Watson, Holmes murmured as we alighted, how the household maintains its customary order despite yesterday's tragedy. The steps are swept, the brass polished, the curtains drawn with mathematical precision. Either Mrs. Hartwell possesses remarkable composure, or her domestic staff operates with admirable efficiency under trying circumstances. The butler who admitted us was a dignified man of perhaps 60 years, whose practiced bearing could not entirely mask recent strain. He conducted us first to the study, where the scene remained precisely as Inspector Lestrade had described. The room itself spoke of scholarly pursuits and commercial success. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, while a substantial mahogany desk dominated the space before tall windows overlooking a modest garden. Mr. Edmund Hartwell lay where death had claimed him, collapsed beside his desk with the fatal letter opener still protruding from beneath his left breast. The wound was clean and precise, suggesting intimate knowledge of anatomy or fortunate chance in the placement of the blow. Holmes immediately dropped to his knees, his magnifying glass appearing as if by magic. "Observe the angle, Watson, downward and slightly from right to left." Our assailant stood close and higher than the victim at the moment of impact. The chair is pushed back, suggesting Hartwell rose to greet his killer before the fatal stroke. He examined the desk's surface minutely, then moved to the door, studying the lock mechanism with particular intensity. "Most interesting," he murmured, producing his forceps to extract something from the keyhole. "Beeswax, Watson." Fresh beeswax worked into the mechanism, and note these fine scratches on the keys, bit recent and made by a delicate instrument. Moving to the fireplace, Holmes knelt again, sifting through the cold ashes. "Cable paper," he announced, holding up a fragment no larger than a postage stamp. "The telegram Mrs. Hartwell mentioned, overseas origin, judging by the particular quality of the paper stock." Our examination was interrupted by the appearance of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell herself. She was a woman of perhaps 30 years, possessed of classical beauty enhanced by intelligence that animated her dark eyes. Her mourning dress was impeccably chosen, neither ostentatiously grief-stricken nor inappropriately casual. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady despite evident strain, "Inspector Lestrade has spoken of your remarkable abilities. I confess myself eager for any light you might shed upon this terrible business." Holmes bowed slightly, his manner courteous yet penetrating. "Mrs. Hartwell, your letter to Inspector Lestrade suggests you anticipated some form of danger to your husband. What prompted such prescience?" Her composure wavered slightly. "I cannot explain it rationally, Mr. Holmes. When that telegram arrived and Edmund became so agitated, speaking of the past, finding him at last, something in his manner filled me with dread. I thought it prudent to establish my whereabouts should questions arise." "The telegram's contents?" Edmund read it twice, then cast it into the fire. "He said only that some debts could never be fully paid, and that he must spend time alone in his study to arrange certain affairs." "It was. Then I decided to attend evening service." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular intensity I had learned to associate with significant revelations. "Most thoughtful, madam. Tell me, what color wax do you customarily use for your correspondence?" "Black wax, Mr. Holmes. Always black." As we prepared to take our leave, Holmes paused at the writing desk in the bay window, his lens passing over the blotting pad. In the gaslight's angle, I glimpsed what appeared to be the faint impression of handwriting, though I could make nothing of it. "Come, gentlemen," Holmes said finally, "we have gleaned what we may from this scene. The next act of our drama awaits us at St. Bartholomew's Church and the District Telegraph Office. Between a vicar's testimony and a messenger boy's log, we shall begin to separate truth from the most artful deception. Our first destination lay in the bustling heart of the city, where the District Telegraph Office hummed with the constant activity of messengers and clerks. The manager, a nervous gentleman named Pemberton, produced the relevant records with trembling efficiency, confirming that Mrs. Hartwell's message had indeed been dispatched at 3:30 and delivered to Scotland Yard precisely at 4 o'clock. Young Timothy Hodgins, the messenger responsible for the delivery, proved to be a sharp-eyed lad whose recollection was admirably precise. "The lady was most particular about the timing, sir," he reported to Holmes. Said it must reach Inspector Lestrade before 5 o'clock or not at all. She was dressed, elegant-like, in travelling clothes, and kept checking her watch while I copied the address. Holmes leaned forward with evident interest. You observed her closely. Then, aye, sir. She was polite and calm, paid without counting her coins, but there was something odd about her hands when she reached for her purse. Her hands? She wore gloves, but I glimpsed her wedding ring when she paid the fee. Brand new and shiny it was, but she wore it on her right hand instead of her left. Seemed strange for a lady so particular about everything else. The significance of this observation was not lost upon Holmes, who rewarded the boy with a half-crown. As we departed, my friend's manner had acquired that focused intensity which invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. A bride who wears her wedding ring upon the wrong hand while dispatching alibis. Watson. Either nervous distraction or deliberate deception. Street. Bartholomew's Church rose before us through the afternoon gloom like a medieval fortress, its Norman stones blackened by centuries but still projecting timeless sanctity. The Reverend Dr. Whitmore, a scholarly gentleman with kind eyes behind wire spectacles, received us in his study with grave courtesy. Mrs. Hartwell's attendance at evening service is beyond question, he assured us. She arrived punctually at 7, took her seat in the third pew, and remained throughout the entire service. I particularly recall her generous contribution to our restoration fund. Holmes examined the collection basin resting nearby. A sovereign, I believe? Indeed, Mr. Holmes. She apologized for lacking smaller coin and placed it most delicately. She wore gloves throughout, even when we spoke afterward about arranging altar flowers. Gloves throughout the service as well? Yes, which I noted as she is typically more informal in her devotions. Holmes's eyebrows rose. Typically. Then Mrs. Hartwell has attended services here previously. The vicar's expression grew thoughtful. Why, yes indeed. She has been a regular attendee for the past 6 months, every Wednesday evening without fail. Most devout, though she usually sits alone and speaks little with other parishioners. 6 months, Holmes repeated, his eyes gleaming. And yesterday evening, did anything seem unusual in her manner? She appeared more animated than usual, spoke at length about her recent marriage, expressed hope that her husband might join her for future services. She seemed genuinely happy, which made this morning's tragic news all the more shocking. Holmes requested to examine the nave, where he paced softly to the third pew. From beneath the rail he retrieved a wisp of black thread, storing it carefully in his case. Moving to the brass candlesticks near the choir screen, he ran a finger along a hardened drop of wax. Beeswax, he murmured. The same substance we had discovered in Hartwell's study lock. He then selected a service leaflet from the pew, holding it to the light. Against the gas flame's glow, I glimpsed a faint crescent of ash along one edge. When he passed it beneath my nose, I detected the unmistakable odor of recent smoke, mingled with a hint of lavender. As we emerged into the gathering dusk, Holmes's expression had grown increasingly thoughtful. We begin to perceive the outlines of a most elaborate design, Watson. A woman who establishes herself as a reliable church attendee for 6 months, then uses that reputation to construct an unassailable alibi. Yet the evidence confirms she was indeed present, observed by witnesses of unimpeachable character. Lestrade shook his head in bewilderment. Then how could she have committed murder? The timeline makes it physically impossible. Holmes smiled that enigmatic smile I had learned to associate with his most complex cases. Impossible, Inspector? The lady's careful preparation suggests otherwise. A wedding ring worn on the wrong hand, beeswax linking crime scene to sanctuary, and a leaflet bearing traces of smoke and lavender. We are not dealing with impossibility, gentlemen, but with the most artful illusion. Come, our investigation must now turn to the marriage itself, and the curious circumstances under which this 6-month courtship began. Our investigation led us next to examine the physical evidence more thoroughly, beginning with the blotting pad Holmes had noted in Hartwell's study. Returning to the Belgravia residence, Holmes requested privacy in the study, where he carefully placed a sheet of thin paper over the blotter and shaded it with a soft pencil until impressions emerged like ghostly writing from beyond the grave. The technique revealed fragments that made my pulse quicken with their significant scattered words including Wednesday, flowers, Whitmore, and the telltale figures 78.3. Lower on the page, partially obscured but still discernible, were the words garden and what appeared to be door. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular intensity I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. Observe, Watson Our Lady's piety had a timetable, and the garden had a door. These impressions suggest Mrs. Hartwell was planning more than mere church attendance. He carefully preserved the evidence before turning his attention to the household staff, beginning with the butler, Mr. Fairchild, whose composure had steadied somewhat since our earlier visit. The timeline becomes crucial, Holmes stated. Describe precisely Mrs. Hartwell's movements yesterday between 3 and 5 o'clock. The elderly servant folded his hands with practiced precision. After luncheon, sir, Mr. Hartwell retired here to write correspondence. At approximately 20 minutes past 3, Mrs. Hartwell ordered her travelling mantle and veil, departing by hansom from the Mews. She returned shortly before 4 o'clock, requested light tea in her morning room, and instructed that the study fire be well tended against the evening chill. Holmes leaned forward with evident interest. You observed her hands upon her return. She wore gloves throughout, sir, as was her custom when venturing out, and her demeanour, composed, though perhaps more animated than usual. She mentioned looking forward to evening service and had me place a sovereign in her reticule for the collection, saying she wished to avoid fumbling with coins during worship. The housemaid, a nervous girl named Polly, provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. When Holmes inquired about her cleaning duties, she revealed that Mrs. Hartwell had specifically requested attention to the study door, claiming it had been sticking. I wiped around the lock with a cloth, sir. It felt tacky, like fresh polish, though we hadn't polished there recently. Holmes produced the tiny pellet of beeswax he had extracted from the keyhole. This substance, not polish. Tell me, where does the household keep its beeswax? Only for the plate candles, sir, and a small piece we use for squeaky drawers. But that's gone missing from the pantry. Noticed it yesterday morning. Our next destination proved equally illuminating. At the jeweller's establishment near Hanover Square, a precise gentleman in a frock coat confirmed the wedding ring's specifications with professional thoroughness. Plain gold band, delivered 2 days prior to the ceremony. The lady's engagement ring required resizing a fortnight earlier. Holmes's inquiry about measurements drew a puzzled response. Size 6 1/4, sir. Fitted to her right hand. The right hand specifically? Indeed, sir. The lady presented her right hand for measurement. I assumed it might be a foreign custom, though she made no comment about it. This revelation connected perfectly with the messenger boy's earlier observation about the wedding ring's placement during the telegram dispatch. As we departed the shop, Holmes's manner had acquired that focused intensity which invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. We now possess a lady who wears her wedding ring upon the wrong hand when establishing alibis, who never removes her gloves in church, and who leaves traces of beeswax where only sealing wax should properly be found. Our investigation then turned to the marriage itself, where the records at St. George's, Hanover Square, revealed intriguing details. The Reverend Canon Ashworth remembered the ceremony distinctly, despite conducting multiple weddings that morning. Most unusual circumstances, gentlemen. The bride, then, Miss Eleanor Whitmore, claimed her family resided abroad and could not attend. She appeared composed but oddly detached, as though fulfilling an obligation rather than celebrating joy. Holmes examined the registry signatures with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the bride's flowing script. Did Miss Whitmore provide documentation of her previous residence? A letter of good standing from Street Mary's in Brighton, dated 3 months prior. I found it curious that a woman of evident refinement should arrive in London with so few connections. Miss Catherine Hartwell, the deceased's sister, proved even more revealing in her Kensington drawing room, though her hostility toward her late brother's bride was barely concealed. I warned Edmund repeatedly about Eleanor's mysterious background. She appeared from nowhere, claiming to be a deceased colonial administrator's daughter, yet her knowledge seemed studied rather than lived. She knew precisely what to say about colonial life, household management, and society, as though she had researched these subjects rather than experienced them. When pressed for specifics, Miss Hartwell provided disturbing details. She once corrected my pronunciation of a German phrase with too authentic an accent for casual instruction. Another time, she mentioned a musical composition that had premiered in Vienna only months before, hardly knowledge a woman recently arrived from India would possess. Most significantly, Miss Hartwell revealed that her brother had received mysterious foreign correspondence in recent months that disturbed him greatly. Edmund spent 3 years on the continent before establishing his silk business, Vienna, Prague, Budapest. He claimed to study European trade methods but rarely spoke of those years. The recent letters made him withdrawn, speaking vaguely of settling old accounts and making amends for past errors. As we prepared to leave, Holmes made one final observation that tied these revelations together. Examining the envelope that had carried Mrs. Hartwell's prescient letter to Inspector Lestrade, he scraped the seal and studied the sample on his blade. "This is not black sealing wax, gentlemen, but common beeswax tinted with soot. The impression bears Hartwell's crest, but the medium is entirely wrong for proper correspondence." "We have before us," Holmes concluded as our hansom rattled through the evening fog, "a woman who cultivated a 6-month reputation for piety at Street Bartholomew's, who possessed intimate knowledge of continental Europe despite claiming colonial origins, and whose husband was haunted by mysterious foreign correspondence. Add to this her careful preparation of alibis using church beeswax, a wedding ring worn deliberately on the wrong hand, and a missing garden key, and we begin to perceive not impossibility, but the most artful orchestration of revenge." Lestrade shook his head in bewilderment. But if she was genuinely at church, witnessed by a dozen reliable observers, how could she have committed murder? Holmes smiled, that enigmatic expression I had learned to associate with his most complex cases. "The lady's elaborate preparation suggests we are not dealing with impossibility, Inspector, but with the most sophisticated illusion. Tomorrow, we must examine Mr. Hartwell's continental past and discover what sins required such elaborate retribution. The truth lies not in defying physical laws, but in understanding how careful planning can create that very appearance." The following morning brought crisp November air that had swept away the previous day's fog, revealing London in sharp detail. As Holmes led me first to the Central Telegraph Office at Street Martin's Le Grand, his reputation and a quiet word invoking Scotland Yard's interests secured us access to the duplicate records, where a tissue impression revealed the overseas message that had so disturbed Hartwell. The telegram bore Vienna's postmark and a terse message in German that Holmes translated with evident interest. "The debt remains unpaid. The key must be returned before 8 tonight. She will claim what was promised. No further delays. K." Holmes folded the flimsy paper with characteristic precision. "A key demanded before 8 o'clock. Watson, and a lady claiming something promised rather than given. Our bride's mysterious dowry begins to assume more sinister proportions." From the telegraph office, we proceeded to Hartwell's counting house in Cheapside, where the chief clerk, a nervous gentleman named Avery, received us with evident anxiety. Holmes's authoritative manner quickly won the man's confidence, and within minutes he had produced a private ledger from a locked drawer. Mr. Hartwell kept these entries separate from our regular books, Avery explained, his thin fingers trembling slightly as he opened the volume. Special remittances to continental addresses Vienna, Prague, Budapest. The amounts grew substantially over the past 6 months, culminating in a large transfer just last week. Holmes examined the columns with intense concentration. Note the recipients: Watson J. Kral of Vienna, a money lender of questionable reputation, and certain Hungarian parties whose grievances are occasionally settled with steel rather than solicitors' letters. The clerk's revelation that Hartwell had once used the name Elias Harwood on foreign drafts added another layer to the mystery. He claimed it was a clerical error when I questioned it, but the handwriting was unmistakably his own. As we departed the counting house, Holmes's expression had acquired that focused intensity I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. Our silk merchant led a double life, Watson, with debts and obligations that followed him from the continent to claim their due on his wedding day. Returning to the Hartwell residence, we examined the household's key arrangements with renewed purpose. The butler, Mr. Fairchild, led us to a back passage where hooks displayed the various household keys, save for one conspicuous absence. The garden door key, sir. Mr. Hartwell wore it on his personal ring until a fortnight ago, when he had the locks serviced. We have not seen it since. Holmes knelt to examine the garden door's mechanism, his magnifying glass revealing the same beeswax traces we had discovered in the study lock. Observe. Watson finds score marks within the keyhole, and this ingenious smear of wax along the doorframe. Someone has employed a most sophisticated technique to create the illusion of internal security while actually controlling access from without. He produced his forceps and extracted a thin wire from the lock mechanism, a locksmith's trick, adapted for criminal purposes. The door was secured from outside using this wire threaded through the keyhole, manipulated by someone with considerable technical skill. Our investigation of the dismissed gardener Dobbs proved equally illuminating. Found in a public house off Ebury Street, the sullen fellow's resentment loosened under Holmes's coin and Lestrade's official presence. The mistress watched me service that door most particular-like. He growled. Had me file the mechanism smooth and polish the metalwork. Next day she claimed the big key for copying, saying she knew a locksmith who would oblige a lady. Master laughed, said no proper tradesman would do such work, but she just smiled mysterious-like. When pressed about Mrs. Hartwell's behavior during this period, Dobbs provided a crucial detail. She spoke German to herself while watching me work, sir. Fluent as a native, though she claimed to be fresh from India, and her hands soft they were, but with calluses on the fingertips like someone who'd done fine mechanical work. As we departed the public house, Holmes's step quickened with evident excitement. We begin to perceive our adversary's true nature, Watson, a woman with continental origins, mechanical expertise, and the patience to spend months preparing an elaborate deception. The final piece of our morning's investigation came from an unexpected source. At the local locksmith's shop, the proprietor initially denied any unusual commissions, but Holmes's persistence and a half-sovereign's encouragement loosened his tongue. A lady did come seeking a special key copied, he admitted reluctantly. Paid well for discretion and speed, but the original she brought wasn't for copying, it was for studying. She made wax impressions and asked detailed questions about lock mechanisms, said she was writing a novel about burglars and needed technical accuracy. Holmes examined the wax impressions the locksmith had retained, comparing them to the garden key's distinctive pattern. Perfect matches, Watson. Our lady spent considerable time learning not just to copy keys, but to understand the very principles of lock manipulation. As we returned to Baker Street, Holmes's manner had grown increasingly thoughtful. We are dealing with someone far more sophisticated than a mere domestic murderess. The 6 months of church attendance, the careful cultivation of witnesses, the technical preparation all suggest a mind capable of orchestrating deception on a grand scale. The afternoon post brought confirmation of Holmes's suspicions in the form of a letter from his continental correspondent in Vienna. Elias Harwood was indeed known in certain circles, Holmes read aloud, as a man who accumulated debts of honor that transcended mere money. The lady in question has been seeking him for 3 years, armed with skills that make her formidable indeed. Lestrade, who had joined us for tea, shook his head in bewilderment. But if she was genuinely at church, witnessed by reliable observers, how could she have committed the murder? Holmes smiled, that enigmatic expression I had learned to associate with his most complex cases. The lady's elaborate preparation suggests we are not dealing with impossibility, Inspector, but with the most sophisticated misdirection. Tomorrow we must examine exactly who attended St. Bartholomew's that evening, and discover whether the bride who sent her own alibi was indeed the same woman who received those wedding vows. Holmes's suggestion that we examine the church attendees more closely led us to St. Bartholomew's at first light, where the morning revealed details that evening shadows had concealed. The Reverend Dr. Whitmore received us with his customary courtesy, though I detected unease when Holmes requested individual interviews with each witness to Mrs. Hartwell's presence at the evening service. Mrs. Pemberton, the widow who occupied the 4th pew directly behind Mrs. Hartwell's usual position, proved most illuminating under Holmes's gentle persistence. I noticed her particularly that evening because she seemed different from her usual demeanor, she explained, her weathered hands folded precisely. She turned frequently to acknowledge other congregants, most unusual for someone typically devoted to private prayer. Her mourning veil was extraordinarily thick, which struck me as peculiar for a woman celebrating her wedding day. Holmes leaned forward with evident interest. You observed her face clearly throughout the service? Not her face precisely, sir, but her gestures were unmistakable, the particular way she held her prayer book, though I noticed her gloves appeared to have been mended at the thumb with black thread. Most expertly done, but visible when the gaslight caught it just so. The church warden, Mr. Thornley, provided an even more crucial observation. When she contributed to the collection, I noticed something odd about her voice during the responses. Usually, Mrs. Hartwell sings soprano with a slight tremor, but that evening her voice was fuller, more confident, almost theatrical in projection. Miss Cartwright, the organist, demonstrated the vocal difference with startling clarity. It was as though she had been taking professional lessons or had recovered from some throat ailment. The improvement was quite remarkable, though the lavender scent remained exactly as always. Holmes requested to examine the 3rd pew more thoroughly, where his magnifying glass revealed not only the black thread we had discovered previously, but also a small card wedged beneath the kneeling rail. The pasteboard bore the name Pembroke Theatrical Agency in modest print, along with an address in Drury Lane. From the church, we proceeded directly to this establishment, where the proprietor, a nervous gentleman named Ashworth, initially denied any knowledge of church-related engagements. However, Holmes's authoritative manner and Lestrade's warrant soon loosened his tongue. Miss Ada Hobson was engaged for Wednesday evening services at St. Bartholomew's, he admitted reluctantly. Paid handsomely to sit quietly, participate in responses, and exchange pleasantries with the vicar afterward. The client insisted she wear provided garments and maintain her veil throughout. The client's identity? Holmes inquired sharply. A lady, calling herself Mrs. Vale, with careful English but distinctly continental inflections. She brought a hatbox containing the necessary attire, already scented with lavender water, to match the regular attendee's customary fragrance. Holmes examined the agency's records with intense concentration. Note the dates. Watson-Miss Hobson's engagements began precisely 6 months ago, establishing the pattern that would make last evening's substitution undetectable. Our next destination was Wardour Street, where Werner Milliner, displayed modest gilt lettering. Fräulein Werner admitted supplying Mrs. Hartwell's wedding veil and, more significantly, a second identical veil 6 weeks earlier. She requested it be weighted with fine lead shot sewn into the hem, ensuring it would hang perfectly still despite drafts. Most particular about the construction, she was. Holmes produced the black thread from his evidence case. Your work? Assuredly, sir. Leipzig silk, the finest quality. She paid in foreign currency and requested absolute discretion. From the milliner's, we visited a costumer's establishment, where Holmes's methodical inquiries revealed that Mrs. Hartwell had commissioned mourning attire in 2 different sizes, one matching her own measurements. Another, for a woman of similar height, but different proportions. She claimed to be ordering for a bereaved cousin abroad. The seamstress recalled, paid extra for rush completion, and said the garments must be indistinguishable when worn with heavy veils. As we returned through the gathering afternoon, Holmes's expression had acquired that focused intensity which invariably preceded his most brilliant revelations. We are no longer dealing with impossibility, gentlemen, but with the most elaborate theatrical substitution ever attempted. A woman who spent months establishing an unshakable pattern then employed a professional actress to maintain her alibi while she attended to more deadly business. Lestrade shook his head in amazement. But how could she have committed murder while the substitute was at church? Holmes smiled, that enigmatic expression I had learned to associate with his most complex cases. The locked room presents no mystery once we understand that our murderess possessed both locksmith skills and intimate knowledge of her victim's habits. Tomorrow, we shall demonstrate exactly how beeswax, patience, and continental vengeance combined to create the perfect crime. The afternoon's final discovery came from Holmes's examination of the hatbox Miss Hobson had returned to the agency. Beneath the tissue paper, traces of ash and a faint impression revealed the outline of a key not Hartwell's garden key, but something far more significant to our investigation. The key impression Holmes discovered in the hatbox proved far more significant than a simple household key. Producing a leather-bound catalogue of continental banking mechanisms from his coat pocket, he compared the faint outline with meticulous precision. An Austrian strong-room key, Watson, he announced, his grey eyes gleaming with triumph. Note the distinctive trefoil pattern and the spacing of these ward marks. This opens a private vault at the Österreichische Länderbank in Vienna. The small notch here indicates a personal identifier, unique to the account holder. The implications struck me immediately. The telegram demanded a key before 8 o'clock. This is what our mysterious K sought to reclaim. Holmes nodded grimly. And what our bride possessed, having taken it from her husband's person after his death. But observe the timing. Watson, the key rested in Miss Hobson's hatbox throughout the church service, making it impossible for Mrs. Hartwell to surrender it by the 8 o'clock deadline, even had she wished to do so. We returned immediately to interview Miss Hobson more thoroughly, where her additional details proved illuminating. The lady who called herself Mrs. Vale was most particular about the hatbox's placement. The actress recalled, I was to keep it beside me on the pew at all times, never allowing it from my sight. When I collected my fee after 9 o'clock, she seemed greatly relieved to reclaim it, though she departed immediately toward Holborn without her usual pleasantries. Holmes's reconstruction of events now assumed devastating clarity. Consider the elaborate preparation, Watson. 6 months of establishing unshakable church attendance, cultivating witnesses who would swear to her presence. The careful commissioning of duplicate mourning attire, weighted veils, and theatrical substitution. The patient study of locksmithing techniques. The procurement of beeswax. The cultivation of the dismissed gardener's assistants. On the fatal evening, she first ensured her substitute was properly positioned at street. Bartholomew's, complete with the hatbox containing the vault key impression and distinctive black thread repairs that would be observed by Mrs. Pemberton, while Miss Hobson maintained her alibi with practiced responses and generous collection contributions. Mrs. Hartwell herself returned to Belgravia through the garden entrance. The garden door mechanism, we now understood, had been prepared weeks in advance. Using the key she had secretly copied through the locksmith services, she could enter and exit at will. The beeswax traces we discovered indicated her method. The door was secured from outside using a thin wire threaded through the keyhole, creating the illusion of internal locking while maintaining external control. The study window provided her actual means of entry. Holmes continued, examining the scratched casement once more. She approached through the garden, avoiding all street observation, then manipulated the window catch using techniques learned during her mechanical studies. Once inside, she confronted Hartwell with demands for the vault key, the same key that would unlock whatever continental secrets had driven him to assume a new identity in London. The murder itself had been swift and decisive. Hartwell, already agitated by the threatening telegram, would have been vulnerable to surprise attack. The letter opener, chosen from his own desk set, ensured no foreign weapon would be discovered. After retrieving the vault key from his person, she had departed through the window, sealing it from outside using the same beeswax technique employed on the garden door. But the masterstroke, Holmes observed with grudging admiration, was the alibi letter itself. By dispatching it hours before the crime, she created the appearance of prescient fear rather than calculated planning. Who would suspect a woman thoughtful enough to establish her whereabouts in advance? Lestrade shook his head in bewilderment. The preparation required staggers belief, months of planning for a single evening's work. Years, Inspector, Holmes corrected. This vengeance has been brewing since whatever continental betrayal drove her to seek Elias Harwood across Europe. The marriage was merely the final act of an elaborate drama. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Holmes announced his intention to test one final element of his theory. We must examine the precise timing of the telegram's arrival and Mrs. Hartwell's subsequent movements. If my reasoning proves correct, we shall discover that she orchestrated not merely her husband's death, but the very circumstances that would make investigation inevitable. The evening's work would reveal whether the bride who sent her own alibi was indeed the most calculating murderess we had ever encountered, or whether some even more sinister truth lay hidden beneath layers of continental deception and carefully cultivated English respectability. Our investigation of the telegram's precise timing led us first to the Western Union office in Piccadilly, where Holmes's methodical examination of the delivery logs revealed a crucial discrepancy. The message from Vienna had arrived at 6:30. But the delivery boy's route sheet showed an unusual delay between the Hartwell residence and his next appointment. Young Peters, the messenger responsible, proved reluctant to discuss the matter, until Holmes's gentle persuasion and a sovereign's encouragement loosened his tongue. The lady at the house gave me an extra shilling to wait while she prepared a reply, Peters admitted sheepishly. Said I should tell anyone who asked that I'd delivered the message and departed immediately, but she needed time to compose her thoughts. Holmes leaned forward with intense interest as the boy continued. She read the telegram twice, then walked to the plan and window overlooking the garden. She seemed to be timing something, checking her watch against the church bells. Then she wrote a brief reply and sealed it with black wax, though she used a candle flame instead of proper sealing equipment. The reply telegram, when we examined the carbon copy, contained only a cryptic message that made my pulse quicken. The key will be surrendered as promised. 8:30 at the garden door. Come alone. E. The destination was the same Vienna address that had sent the threatening message, and the timing corresponded precisely with the end of evening service at St. Bartholomew's. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular intensity I had learned to associate with crucial revelations. She arranged a rendezvous for 8:30, knowing full well that her substitute would maintain her alibi until that precise moment. But observe the signature, Watson, E for Eleanor, when the original demand was addressed to her husband Edmund. Our murderess was already planning to meet her blackmailer personally. From the telegraph office, we proceeded to examine the Hartwell garden more thoroughly, where Holmes's methodical search revealed disturbing evidence of the evening's true events. Near the door, partially concealed beneath fallen leaves, lay a gentleman's walking stick of foreign manufacture. The silver head bore initials KV and showed recent damage consistent with violent impact. "Our mysterious correspondent from Vienna," Holmes observed, examining the stick with his magnifying glass. "Note the blood traces on the ferrule and the distinctive scratches along the shaft. This weapon saw recent use, though not in the study where Hartwell died." The garden soil itself told a more complete story. Holmes's careful excavation revealed footprints of 2 different sizes, one matching Mrs. Hartwell's delicate boots, the other belonging to a larger man wearing continental-style shoes with distinctive heel patterns. "A confrontation occurred here," Holmes concluded, studying the disturbed earth. "The larger prints show signs of stumbling, while the smaller ones maintain steady positioning throughout. Our lady kept her appointment, but the meeting did not proceed as her correspondent anticipated. As we prepared to examine the area more thoroughly, a commotion from the street drew our attention. Mrs. Hartwell herself approached through the front gate, accompanied by Dr. Whitmore from Street Bartholomew's. Her manner appeared composed, though I detected a certain wariness as she observed our presence in her garden. "Mr. Holmes," she called, her voice carrying across the small space with perfect clarity. "I trust your investigation proceeds satisfactorily. Dr. Whitmore has kindly offered to assist with my husband's funeral arrangements, and we hope to select appropriate flowers from the garden." Holmes straightened slowly, his keen gaze fixed upon the lady with unmistakable intensity. "Indeed, Mrs. Hartwell, your garden has proved most illuminating, though perhaps not in the manner you anticipated. Tell me, do you recognize this walking stick?" Her composure wavered almost imperceptibly as she approached the evidence, and I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Her right hand bore no trace of the mended glove that Mrs. Pemberton had observed so clearly during the church service. "I cannot say that I do, Mr. Holmes. Should I?" Holmes's smile carried that enigmatic quality I had learned to associate with his most dramatic revelations. "Perhaps not the stick itself, but surely you recall its owner. After all, someone arranged to meet him here at 8:30 yesterday evening, immediately following the conclusion of evening service at Street Bartholomew's." Dr. Whitmore stepped forward with evident confusion. "I fear there must be some misunderstanding, Mr. Holmes. Mrs. Hartwell remained at church until well past 8:30, speaking with several parishioners about her husband's tragic death. Holmes's smile broadened with genuine appreciation for the thoroughness of the deception. "Indeed, Doctor, your testimony, like that of your other parishioners, is entirely accurate. The woman you knew as Mrs. Hartwell was indeed present throughout the service. However, I suggest that we must now determine whether the lady standing before us is the same person who has been attending your church these past 6 months, or whether we are confronting an even more elaborate masquerade than we had previously imagined." Holmes's accusation hung in the garden air like a challenge, yet his manner remained deceptively calm as he studied the woman before us. Rather than press his advantage immediately, he withdrew a small notebook and pencil from his waistcoat. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you would be so kind as to provide a brief written statement acknowledging our visit today, a mere formality for Inspector Lestrade's records." The request appeared innocuous enough, yet I observed her hesitation barely perceptible, but telling to one trained in reading human nature. She removed her right glove with practiced efficiency, and I noted with a physician's eye the faint calluses along her fingertips, marks consistent with delicate mechanical work rather than domestic pursuits. Holmes watched intently as she wrote, his keen gaze fixed not on her face but on the movement of her pen. When she returned the notebook, he examined the script through his magnifying glass with theatrical deliberation. "Most illuminating," he murmured, then addressed Dr. Whitmore with apparent casualness. "Doctor, you mentioned that Mrs. Hartwell typically removes her gloves when arranging altar flowers. I trust you observed her hands clearly during these activities?" "Indeed, Mr. Holmes. Eleanor bears a distinctive scar across her left palm, the result of a childhood accident with broken crockery," she once explained. Quite unmistakable when glimpsed, Holmes's smile carried that quality I had learned to associate with his most crucial revelations. "Then you will not object, madam, to removing your left glove as well. The scar should be readily apparent and would confirm your identity beyond question." The woman's composure cracked like ice under sudden pressure. Her dark eyes darted between us, calculating rapidly, and when she spoke again, her carefully cultivated English accent had acquired unmistakable continental inflections. "Gentlemen, you have proven more perceptive than I anticipated. I confess myself impressed by your deductive abilities, though perhaps not sufficiently impressed to surrender myself to English justice." "You are not Eleanor Hartwell at all," Holmes stated with quiet certainty. "You are Katharina Brenner of Vienna, whose husband died in Austrian custody 3 years ago after being betrayed by an English informant named Elias Harwood, the man who later assumed the identity of Edmund Hartwell, silk merchant of Belgravia." Her laugh carried bitter satisfaction. "You know the name, at least." "Yes, I am Katharina Brenner, and your precious silk merchant was the informant who sold my husband's life for English gold. But you understand only half the truth, Mr. Holmes." She gestured toward the bloodied walking stick with controlled fury. "The man who came here last evening was Klaus Varga, the Austrian agent who recruited Harwood as an informant. He sought to reclaim the evidence that would expose their entire network of betrayal documents my husband died protecting." Holmes nodded with grim understanding. The vault key contained not money, but proof of the conspiracy. You married Hartwell to gain access to those documents, then eliminated Varga when he came to collect them. "I killed them both because they deserved death," she replied with cold precision. "Harwood for his treachery, Varga for orchestrating it. But the true masterpiece was the alibi itself. 6 months of cultivating witnesses, employing Miss Ada Hobson to impersonate me at church while I attended to justice." Lestrade stepped forward, his hand moving toward his truncheon. "The actress maintained your presence at Street Bartholomew's while you committed murder." "2 murders, Inspector," Holmes corrected. "Varga died here in this garden shortly after 8 o'clock, struck down with his own walking stick." Then she entered the study through the prepared window, confronted Hartwell with the evidence of his betrayal, and ended his miserable existence with his own letter opener. The sound of approaching footsteps on the street beyond indicated that our confrontation had attracted attention. Katharina Brenner's eyes darted toward the garden gate, her body tensing like a cat preparing to spring. "You have perhaps 30 seconds before reinforcements arrive," she said, producing a small revolver from within her coat with practiced efficiency. "I suggest you consider whether apprehending 1 woman is worth the lives of 3 men." Holmes raised his hands in a gesture of apparent surrender, though I detected that familiar gleam in his eyes that preceded his most brilliant stratagems. "Your husband's death was indeed a tragedy, Miss Brenner, but murder cannot restore justice. However, I believe you will find that your careful preparations have served our purposes as well as your own." The garden gate burst open as uniformed constables poured through, their arrival coordinated with military precision. Yet even as the net closed around her, Katharina Brenner's smile carried the satisfaction of one who had achieved her primary objective, regardless of the personal cost. The confrontation reached its climax as Katharina Brenner's revolver gleamed in the pale afternoon light. Yet Holmes appeared remarkably composed for a man facing imminent death. Rather than retreat, He stepped forward with that quiet authority I had learned to associate with his most crucial revelations. "Your weapon is indeed formidable, Miss Brenner, but I fear you will find it or lacks the essential component for effective use," Holmes observed with maddening calm. "Inspector Lestrade's men removed the firing pin yesterday evening when they searched your lodgings. You will find the mechanism quite inoperative." Her fingers squeezed the trigger repeatedly, producing only hollow clicks that echoed through the garden like a death rattle. The realization that her final gambit had failed struck her with visible force, and the revolver fell from nerveless fingers to strike the frozen earth with metallic finality. Lestrade's constables moved swiftly, securing her arms as she offered no further resistance. The fight had gone out of her completely, replaced by the weary resignation of one whose elaborate scheme had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. "The game is up, Miss Brenner," Holmes continued, his keen eyes studying her face with professional interest. Or should I say, the woman who assumed the identity of Eleanor Whitmore 6 months ago cultivated an unshakable reputation for piety at Street Bartholomew's, then married Edmund Hartwell under false pretenses to position herself for the perfect revenge. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her continental accent, now pronounced as the careful English facade, crumbled completely. "Since this morning, when my examination of the garden revealed traces of a struggle and bloodstains that could not have originated from your husband's study. The walking stick confirmed the presence of a second victim, Klaus Varga, I presume." Her bitter laugh carried the satisfaction of one who had achieved her primary objective, regardless of personal cost. He came seeking the vault key, expecting to meet the compliant widow of his former informant. Instead, he found the wife of the man he had condemned to death in an Austrian prison. Holmes gestured toward the potting shed, where his earlier investigation had revealed disturbing evidence. "You concealed his body there, intending to dispose of it during the funeral arrangements. A sound plan, had we not arrived so promptly." As if summoned by his words, 2 constables emerged from the shed carrying a canvas-wrapped burden. The form of Klaus Varga, Austrian agent and architect of betrayal, bore the fatal wound from his own walking stick justice, delivered with poetic precision by the widow of his victim. 2 murders, Lestrade observed grimly, both planned with extraordinary care and executed with surgical precision. Holmes nodded, his expression mixing professional admiration with moral disapproval. The locked study presented no genuine mystery once we understood the mechanism. Miss Brenner prepared the room weeks in advance, working beeswax into the keyhole and threading a fine wire through the lock mechanism. After striking down Hartwell with his own letter opener, she withdrew through the window, then manipulated the wire from outside to turn the key and secure the door. The scratches on the key's bit and the wax residue told the complete story. "And the alibi?" Dr. Whitmore asked, still struggling to comprehend the elaborate deception. 6 months of establishing an unshakable pattern of church attendance, then employing Miss Ada Hobson of the Pembroke Theatrical Agency to maintain her presence while she attended to more deadly business. The weighted veil, the mended gloves, the lavender scent, every detail calculated to ensure the substitution would pass unnoticed. As the constables prepared to transport their prisoner to Scotland Yard, Katharina Brenner turned back with one final observation. "You may have solved your English murders, Mr. Holmes, but you understand nothing of justice. My husband died protecting secrets that would have saved innocent lives. Hartwell and Varga profited from his sacrifice, while better men perished in Austrian dungeons." Holmes watched her departure with that thoughtful expression I had learned to associate with cases that extended beyond their apparent resolution. A remarkable woman, Watson, whose capacity for patient planning exceeded even my initial estimates. 6 months of meticulous preparation, multiple murders executed with technical brilliance, and an alibi so perfect it required theatrical substitution to maintain. Holmes reflected upon the extraordinary complexity of the case we had just concluded. The bride who sent her own alibi was indeed the perfect murderess, save for one crucial oversight. She underestimated the power of methodical investigation to reveal truth beneath even the most artful deception. The November evening had settled over Baker Street with that particular quietude that follows the resolution of a complex case, and Holmes sat before our fire with the satisfied air of a man who had successfully untangled the most intricate of human puzzles. The gaslight cast dancing shadows across his aquiline features as he filled his pipe with methodical precision while I poured brandy for us both and reflected upon the extraordinary events we had witnessed. "A remarkable case, Watson," Holmes began, accepting his glass with evident satisfaction. "Perhaps one of the most intricately planned crimes we have ever encountered, a masterpiece of deception that required not weeks, but months of patient preparation." Inspector Lestrade arrived within the hour, his manner betraying both relief at the case's resolution and lingering amazement at its complexity. "The woman's full confession has confirmed every detail of your deductions, Holmes," he reported, settling into his customary chair. "Katharina Brenner spent 3 years tracking Elias Harwood across Europe before discovering his London identity as Edmund Hartwell." Holmes steepled his fingers before his chin, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight as he considered the broader implications. The marriage was indeed a calculated maneuver to gain access to the vault key and the documents that would expose the entire Austrian intelligence network. Her husband died protecting those secrets, and she sought not merely personal vengeance but justice for all who had suffered from Harwood's betrayals. "The elaborate nature of her preparation staggers belief," I observed. 6 months of establishing an unshakable reputation at Street Bartholomew's, learning locksmithing techniques, commissioning duplicate mourning attire, employing theatrical substitution, every detail calculated with mathematical precision. "Indeed, Watson. Consider the layers of deception. First, the creation of Eleanor Whitmore, a woman of refinement and piety, whose consistent church attendance would provide the foundation for an unassailable alibi. The engagement of Miss Ada Hobson to impersonate her during the crucial evening service was inspired the weighted veils, the practiced vocal responses, even the strategically mended glove with black thread ensured that attentive parishioners would swear to her presence." Holmes rose and moved to examine the evidence we had collected, now arranged upon our side table like pieces of an elaborate puzzle. The beeswax traces linking crime scene to sanctuary, the wedding ring deliberately worn on the wrong hand, the theatrical agency card beneath the church pew, each element revealed a portion of the larger design. While Miss Hobson maintained her alibi with practiced devotion, Katharina Brenner used her copied garden key and locksmith skills to gain access to the residence. "But she intended more than Hartwell's death," Lestrade interjected. "The confrontation with Klaus Varga in the garden was equally premeditated." "Precisely, Inspector. The telegram from Vienna, demanding the key by 8 o'clock, came from Varga himself, the very agent who had orchestrated her husband's downfall. Her reply, arranging a meeting at 8:30, ensured that both architects of her husband's betrayal would face justice on the same evening. The bloodied walking stick, the disturbed earth in the garden, Varga's body concealed in the potting shed, all evidence of her comprehensive revenge. As the evening deepened, our conversation turned to the moral complexities of the case. One cannot help but admire the extraordinary patience required for such elaborate preparation, Holmes mused. Yet murder remains murder, regardless of the nobility of the underlying motive. "What will become of her?" I inquired, thinking of the woman whose elaborate revenge had consumed years of careful planning. "Transportation, most likely," Lestrade replied grimly. "Though the intelligence she has provided about Austrian operations may influence the court's consideration. The Foreign Office has expressed considerable interest in the documents she recovered." Holmes returned to his violin, drawing forth those melancholy notes that invariably followed his most challenging cases. In the music, I heard both satisfaction at another mystery solved, and perhaps a grudging respect for an adversary whose intellectual capabilities had nearly matched his own. She achieved her primary objective, Watson. Holmes observed between passages. The evidence of her husband's sacrifice will finally see light, and those responsible for his death have paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. The bride who sent her own alibi knew full well that even perfect planning could not guarantee escape, only justice. As the fire burned low and the street sounds of London faded into the night's embrace, I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary case we had just concluded. The woman who had called herself Eleanor Hartwell had demonstrated that the most dangerous criminals were often those driven not by greed or passion, but by an unwavering commitment to what they perceived as justice. Holmes set aside his violin with characteristic finality. "There is nothing so deceptive as an obvious alibi, Watson, and nothing so dangerous as virtue pressed into the service of vengeance. Our work is to separate the instrument from the hand from the mind, and where we can, the mind from the motive." He smiled then, with that mixture of satisfaction and melancholy that marked the conclusion of our most complex cases. The case of the bride who sent her own alibi will long remain as a testament to the power of methodical investigation to reveal truth beneath even the most artful deception. Outside, the fog pressed close against our windows, as if listening to the final notes of justice played out in the gaslit sanctuary of Baker Street.